Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next session, which is entitled Navigating a Cancer Diagnosis, or more importantly, I've been diagnosed with cancer. Now what? A cancer diagnosis is a life-changing event that can leave you with a whirlwind of emotions ranging from anger to sadness to guilt. In this session, please join our panel of healthcare professionals and patients as they discuss the psychosocial impact of a cancer diagnosis and some of the strategies that they've used for coping with this. I'd like to welcome Becky Cassidy, who's a patient advocate who's with us today, Eric Hamilton, who's broadcasting from Edmonton, who is also a patient advocate. And please help me welcome Dr. Harvey Chochinov, who is a distinguished professor of psychiatry at the University of Manitoba, a senior scientist at Cancer Care Manitoba Research Institute. Welcome to the three of you, and thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to get started with you, Eric, and it would be very helpful to our audience if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey with cancer, particularly at the very early stage of diagnosis and some of the experiences that you had.
Sure. Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Anne-Marie. I'll start by saying I'm 43 years old. I am married. I have two children. I have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 41. That was in 2022. So when I thought about cancer in my family, I thought about my dad's experience with prostate cancer. He had it when he was around the same age, and he was treated successfully. And that was about 20 years before I was diagnosed, so it kind of receded from my mind. But in 2022, I started to experience some symptoms. I had some bleeding. That was alarming to me. I knew something wasn't right. And so I went to my family doctor, and she examined me and said, yes, this is something we should check out, but the wait list for colonoscopies on the public system is 6 to 8 months. So I thought that's a little too long for me to wait and find out what's going on. And so in Alberta, we have the option of paying for private exams. So I did a procedure called a virtual colonoscopy. It's kind of a hybrid between a CT scan and a colonoscopy. And that's what eventually found that there was a lesion in my colon that was likely malignant. And so I had done this scan and was kind of thinking, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I want to know what this is, but I wasn't truly ready for when the family doctor called me with the scan results and told me that it was probably a form of cancer. And that news was like getting hit with a ton of bricks. That's such an apt metaphor for getting news like that. And I remember where I was on a work call. It was like a conference call, and I got this news, and I just couldn't continue my day, and I was unfortunately alone most of the day. So I didn't have the social supports that I would have wanted to have, but it was really a life-changing day. And so later on, I just had feelings of kind of wanting to shield my family from the news. Not sure how my kids would react. I knew my wife would be devastated as I was, but those are my initial thoughts after being diagnosed.
Thank you. Eric, can you remind me how old your children were at the time?
Well, they're 10 and 7 now, so they would have been about 8 and 5.
Yeah, so very young and understandable feelings to say, how do I actually talk to my children about? We'll talk about that a little bit. Thank you very much. And what's also very interesting about your story, and I think others in our audience would be interested to know, is there must have been an intuition you had that caused you to want to not wait for a full colonoscopy, pardon me. So was it your intuition that actually guided you in those early phases?
Yes, it was. I mean, the bleeding was, like I said, that's an alarming symptom. I knew that something is not right. This has never happened to me before. And yeah, I just knew that it had to be checked out. Sometimes you have the instinct when something uh, happens like that I don't want to find out. I want to just kind of carry on. You know, with thinking back, I did have fatigue that and that wasn't as alarming because, you know, I was in early middle age as I am now. And, you know, you have children, you have a career, you're trying to look after a household. And if you have fatigue, you just kind of push through it. But when I had bleeding, I knew something was wrong, and I had to get it checked out and find out what was going on.
Yeah, yeah. A sign that you pay attention, you know your body and you pay attention. Thank you for sharing that. Becky, I'd like you to now bring you into the conversation, and similarly, we'd like to get to know you a little bit and your personal journey with diagnosis.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Thanks so much for having me here today. It's really important that we're talking about these subjects around this awful disease. So I am 40 years old and I was diagnosed with colon cancer in 2021. A little bit of history. I had a colonoscopy in, I would say it was around 2017. I had some gastro issues. I was trying to figure out kind of what was going on. And at that time I had a polyp and it was removed and everything was okay. And they had told me to come back for another colonoscopy. So I came back, I think it was 2 years later, I had another polyp. And so they said, you need to come back just because this keeps recurring. So in 2021, early 2021, I had a colonoscopy, and this would have been right before COVID hit. I had a colonoscopy, and there was a polyp inside of me that wasn't cancer, but it was a little bit tricky for our physician to remove here in the small town that we were in. And he said, we need a gastroenterologist to do this because there is a chance of a perforated bowel if I do this. So you need to go to a larger city where they have the, you know, ability to deal with that if it happens. So finished the colonoscopy. That was the end of it. And by the time they could get me in, COVID had hit. And I was pregnant. So I was pregnant with my third child at the time. And so the gastroenterologist said, you know, it's not cancer yet. Let's just wait. We can't obviously do a colonoscopy while you're pregnant. It looks like it's going to be okay. We'll do it after you have the baby. So in November of 2021, I had a fairly, not a very good childbirth and an emergency C-section. It was pretty tremendously hard on my body, but we had a beautiful baby girl, our third child. And then I had to go for this colonoscopy. So once my body had kind of healed, I gave myself a couple months. In April, I went in for a colonoscopy to have that polyp removed. And in the time that I was pregnant, it had turned into cancer. So at that time, in April of 2021, it was still everything was shut down. So I went up for the colonoscopy by myself. My daughter was 5 months old. My husband and my daughter waited in the parking lot. I nursed her. I went up to the unit. I had my colonoscopy, and then when I woke up, everyone was kind of gathered around me. The anesthesiologist was even there, and they just said, "I'm really sorry, but you have cancer." And I looked at him and I said, how do you know that? Don't you have to send that away? Can't you, you know, how is this possible? And he just said, I've been doing this since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. I can tell you right now that it's cancer, but we'll send it away. And it was really hard. I was by myself. My breast milk was leaking out. I was a mess. I was only 5 months postpartum. I still wasn't fully healed from my C-section. 3 kids at home and my husband waiting down the parking lot. So the nurse walked me down to the parking lot where my husband and baby were. We got in the car and we just kind of took a deep breath and said, okay, we're going to get through this. Let's do this. We'll figure it out. And we drove home. It was 2 hours to drive home from there. And we shared the news with our family. And I would say, after that, it was pretty up and down. I still had a lot of postpartum hormones running through my body, a little bit of postpartum depression, exhaustion, because we have 3 kids. At the time, they were 11, 3, and 5 months old. So my 3-year-old still wasn't sleeping through the night. We were always exhausted. We were chasing my 11-year-old around the hockey rinks. And, it was hard. I remember thinking, why me? I remember kind of curling up on my laundry room floor and just sobbing uncontrollably, which I know had a lot to do with my hormones at the time. But it was pretty scary. And too, when you're diagnosed with colon cancer, lots of times they can't tell you if it's spread or not until they do surgery. So I had no idea. I didn't know what the treatment would be. I just knew that they were going to send me for a hemicolectomy. And after that, they would then determine what was next in this instance. So you don't know. You just don't know. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you to both. Thank you, Becky. That's an extraordinary story. And I think this is a wonderful time, Dr. Chachanov, to bring you into the conversation. These are 2 beautiful young people with beautiful young families being diagnosed with serious cancer. So I'd like you to provide your comments on what that must feel like, some of the guidance, how many times this might show up in your office, some of the guidance and early steps that you might advise people on when they're facing such a difficult circumstance in their life at such a young age.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you both for sharing these difficult and painful stories. And I won't presume to be the experts on you, because you're the experts on you. I mean, you know your experience from the inside out. So all I can do is, as an outsider, offer some reflections and some of the thoughts that came up as you were each sharing your stories. I'm thinking about your comment, Eric, when you said that suddenly it was like being hit by a brick wall, like it was the kind, and that you remember exactly where you were, and you think about those moments in life where you remember exactly where you were, and they're usually moments where life changes thereafter. We think about events in our lives that we remember, with exquisite clarity. Becky talked about, giving birth to her children. I'm sure those experiences, each of those pregnancies and deliveries, I mean, they put you back to a particular point in time, and you remember them because life is forever different. And when you talked about hearing about the diagnosis, it had that kind of quality, that life is forever different. You also talked about wanting to shield your family, not knowing, who do I talk to right away, who do I tell, almost wanting to, as you say, protect them. But I wonder if part of that, and again, I've seen this in others. Part of it is kind of almost this wishful thinking to be able to kind of carry on as if things were normal. Like if I don't talk about it, then I can still be Eric, the father, the husband, the provider. The moment we start talking about it, I mean, for some people, it makes it feel real, and it also makes it feel like, and now I have to share the fact that things have changed, that life is different, that I'm different, or feel different about myself in some ways. Similarly, Becky, that poignant scene that you talk about of hearing the diagnosis, you've been nursing, leaking milk. The interesting thing about that is that on the one hand, breastfeeding is so life-giving, so kind of a part of, being in life fully, completely, bringing another child into this world. And the contrast is, oh my God, what are you talking about? I got cancer. So just that incredible juxtaposition. And maybe the last thing I'll kind of put out there, and I don't know if this resonates with either of you, but for some people, the diagnosis, part of the emotional struggle is, not only does this change life, but does this change the way I feel about myself? I mean, because before the cancer diagnosis, I am Eric, I am Becky. Once the diagnosis comes, does that somehow make, now I am a patient, and none of us like to be a patient at the exclusion of being who we are. It's almost as if, we want to make sure that we just had this eclipse. We want to make sure that, that patienthood isn't casting this shadow in our lives that overlooks the fact and darkens the fact that we're still us. Eric, you are still a young man, father, looking after children. Becky, you are a young mom, bringing children into this world with a family. So those are just a few reflections that I had as I was listening to both of your really extraordinary and moving stories.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Becky, Eric, do you want to comment at all on that last insight that Dr. Chechenov had here about losing sense of self, or at least sense of self changing? Any comments that you would like to make about that?
Well, I appreciate the comments, and I think the sense of self is real, and I think that Dr. Chochinov was right on when he said nobody really wants to be a patient, because for me, when I think about a patient, I think of a person who is passive, who is passively receiving help because they're in need of help, and that's not really what I want for myself. I much prefer the word survivor when I think about where I'm at with my cancer, because there's a chance cancer can come back, but I'm alive right now. And I think when you talk about shielding the family, I mean, I think initially what my thought is that maybe I shouldn't share this thought with my wife unless she can fix it, unless she can do something about it. I mean, what's the point of talking about it if she can't fix it? But that's kind of a faulty way of thinking, because that increases the isolation that you feel as a person who has cancer. And that the thing we need to do is to share with our loved ones what we're thinking and what's bothering us, because that's the only way you can get through it. You can't get through it as just a lone wolf.
Yeah.
I want to build on that comment of sharing, and I think you do too, Dr. Chechenov. Becky, I just want to give you a moment to comment on the sense of self question that was put out, and then we can bridge into this wonderful conversation. Well, how do you share? Who do you share with? What's an appropriate way of doing that? Becky.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. Sense of self, sense of guilt, sense of what did I do? I'm not a patient. I am a strong, independent woman. I am a change maker. Did I eat too much bologna? All of these things that go through your mind. Do I need to cut red meat out? Did I do this to myself? And then comparing myself to other people, thinking I'm healthy. All these things, and all of those things go through your mind, because it does kind of change the way you look at yourself. When you hear so-and-so has cancer, you're like, oh my goodness, that's awful. And you think about their life and all of a sudden it's you. And you don't really know what to do with that. And you do have to share it with your family and your friends, and you have to let them in, and you have to, allow people to help you. But there's a lot of things going on in your own head around who you are and your identity, for sure. I would say that is absolutely bang on, because it's there's just so much that goes through your brain when it comes to becoming a patient.
Yeah. Yeah. The other interesting thing about the word patient, it refers to a designation that is generic. In other words, I mean, you are a colorectal cancer patient or a patient with breast cancer. It refers to kind of this generic description of a condition and a category that now somehow you are slotted into. And again, I think the emotional struggle, the spiritual struggle for many people as well. I don't see myself that way. I mean, I don't want to be defined that way. And sometimes, you know, we on the healthcare professional side of things don't always necessarily address that very well, or aren't always sensitive to that, because we tend to silo people. I mean, you know, if you got colorectal cancer, we're going to slot you into the GI oncology clinic because you are a patient with a GI malignancy and that's where you belong. Whereas in your day-to-day life, I mean, you know, like, who wants to think of themselves as fitting into a particular category? You are a unique individual. There's never been one exactly like you, and never will there be exactly one like you. So it's this incredible shift emotionally and spiritually, existentially, this idea of, am I now being seen, you know, through this lens of patienthood? You also raised this notion of guilt, Becky, which is a really interesting and difficult issue. But one of the things about guilt is it somehow implies that I'm responsible, that I could have done something, or perhaps I can still do something. So even though it's a difficult emotion, it's still connected with this idea of control. And the alternative is kind of accepting the fact that, well, Becky, you didn't do a damn thing to bring this on. You know, it wasn't about the bologna you ate or didn't eat. This happened to you, which means having to replace guilt with, you know, this certain element of helplessness that we all experience in life. Things happen to us because life happens to us. But that is quite the contrast from the notion of guilt, which says, no, I am responsible. This is about my actions, my inactions. As I say, it's a painful emotion, but it's the control issue still ends up being then in your hands. And some people find it difficult to let go of control and to actually understand that helplessness and the inability to control bad things that happen in life is just a part of life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for those comments. I want to bridge into a conversation around sharing. And sharing is complicated because in these circumstances, we have sharing with an intimate partner, we have sharing with your children, and we have sharing with friends, family, others, work environments. And Dr. Chachanov, I'm going to ask for your guidance on this conversation as well, but maybe Eric will come to you and just talk about, did you compartmentalize those conversations? Did you have things that worked for you in terms of how you approached those conversations? How much angst perhaps did you have even going into those conversations? So there's a number of different questions in there, but it's under the general guise of, and you've both equally said it, which is, you know, as hard as it was to get into a sharing conversation, you needed to get into a sharing conversation. So I'd be interested in your approach on that, and then some from your perspective, Dr. Chachanov, some perhaps I'll use the word best practices on helping our audience understand how to have these conversations as well. Eric, let's begin with you.
Well, I can tell you what doesn't work when you have young children and you're faced with a situation like this, and that is telling them nothing. We were counseled to do something like that by some older relatives, you know, when this first happened, because the belief is that children can't handle it, they won't know what to do, you'll scare them, best just to keep it at an adult level. But they know, children are perceptive, they know when people are upset in the house, they want to know why mom's crying, or, you know, everyone is all of a sudden anxious. So you just can't keep a lid on it. And where does that even lead to anyways? I mean, how long are you supposed to keep it a secret? It's going to come out eventually. So, I mean, we did the secrecy thing for a little while because we just didn't know what else to do. But then some problems started to show up in our children. Like my son, for instance, developed a tic because of the anxiety. It was like a verbal tic that he hadn't done it before this. And he actually saw a therapist for children. And after a few sessions with this therapist, the therapist made a very compelling case that in the absence of information, the brain is going to make up all kinds of information that might fit the story. And it's probably not going to be accurate. So do you want him to know an age-appropriate version of the truth? Or do you want his brain to sort of run away with things and make up all sorts of things that might not be true? And that kind of came to a head when he shared the fact that in one of the sessions, my son drew a version of the surgery that I had undergone for cancer. And one of the surgeons took out my heart instead of the cancer because he didn't know otherwise. And so I learned about this, and then I had a discussion with my son one night and said, look, you probably don't really know much about what happened with that surgery, but the surgeons were brilliant. They did a great job, and they gave me a really good chance to never have cancer again. So from that instant, it was much better because I shared at an age-appropriate level with my children. And actually, over the course of this cancer struggle, our children have actually boosted up the adults at times. So they can adapt to it. They can, if shared at an age-appropriate level, they're capable, they can handle it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'll give you an opportunity, Dr. Chechenov, to maybe comment on that before we go to Becky.
Well, Eric, it's, I mean, such brilliant insights, sage wisdom. Silence costs. There is a price for silence, and you've articulated those very well. And it's on both sides of the ledger. I mean, on the patient side of the ledger, it means that you live in isolation. You do not garner the support from friends and family and everybody that you most need in your life at that time. So remaining silent means that you pay the price of isolation. On the other side of the ledger, if you don't tell people, and again, I mean, the experience, I love when you said, we learned what not to do, which is nothing. I mean, brilliant. And your son, and the scenario of what happened with your son in developing the tic, it shows the cost of being kept in the dark. And of course, I mean, the psychologists you went to sound like, very astute. The mind will fill in, where there are gaps, and usually will fill in with the darkest, worst possibilities, even things that are likely beyond the reality of what truth is about. So it's something you need to be aware of, which obviously you are and have lived. The other things that I was going to say is that even though you think about sharing as being this, this difficult and painful thing that you are going to do with a loved one, I mean, it seems to me that in some ways, I mean, it's an extraordinary opportunity for caring. I mean, in talking to your children, in telling them what was going on, it's not that you were there trying to kind of inflict pain. What you were doing was looking after them, because again, silence is going to put them in a horrible place. So what you were doing was really extending, what is the essence of your role as a father, as a loving parent? Sharing was part of looking after them. And maybe just one last thing, and that is some people also, I mean, they think about communication or these kinds of communications as an event. We just need to sit down, talk about it, it's done. Communication is not an event. it's a process. You know, it's something that needs to happen over time. And that's what, you know, kind of a loving parent will gauge, you know, like how much do we tell? It's, you know, maybe one time we just sort of indicate that the door is slightly ajar. On the next occasion, we indicate that, you know, it's safe for us to walk through that door if and when you're ready. So those are just a few reflections, Eric, and thank you for sharing such poignant and insightful experiences.
Yeah. Becky, want to bring you into the conversation. I'm incredibly touched by the fact that you were a brand new mom at the time of your diagnosis, in addition to having two other children too. So it's really a sign of your resilience and strength that you're here with us today. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think in terms of sharing with folks about the situation, it really depends on a person's personality and communication style, because maybe I'm the opposite of Eric, but I am a oversharer and over communicator. And I just wanted to tell everybody I loved as soon as possible to get it over with. So I literally called my mom from the hospital parking lot and shared that with her. And I think I texted my two best girlfriends on our group text, you know, and everyone kind of knew what was happening. So, you know, I think when someone that I love has something wrong with them physically and they go to the hospital and they don't tell anyone, I almost feel like that person's being disloyal. You know, that's just, and I realize that that's not at all the case, and that everyone has their own way of communicating. But to me, you know, I really wanted to share that right away with all the people that I cared about. You know, it's hard, you know, and you never know what people's responses will be. And obviously sending a text about the fact that you have cancer to your best friends is not not ideal. But, you know, in terms of my kids, you know, they were 5 months, 3 and 11. We did share with my son right away what we knew. And we just said, you know, I made it sound as positive as I could. I said, I have cancer. I have to go for a right hemicolectomy where they're going to take out some of my guts, I think was the word that I used for my 11-year-old. And then they're going to sew me back shut, just like they took your sister out of me 5 months ago. And they're going to sew me back shut, and I'll likely be okay. And if not, maybe I'll need further treatment, and we'll find out. And I tried to make it as, you know, simple and you know, age appropriate as possible. But I didn't realize, you know, how hard that was for him until just this year. He was filling out some surveys. And he, you know, he said one of the hardest things I've ever been through was when my mom had cancer. And I thought, I thought he was kind of unfazed, because I tried to shield him from that. But I think, you know, it is important to share as much as you can at an age appropriate level, you know, so that, you know, the absence of knowledge is, it's definitely true that people fill in the gaps. So I think sharing as soon as possible, as much information as you can with people that you love is very, very important.
Again, Dr. Chektanov, I'd like you to comment on that. One of the questions I have is that, you know, when what I call your friends and family are gain knowledge of what you have, like, what are the common reactions to that? Do people naturally want to rally? Or is there circumstances where people should be prepared for perhaps the opposite?
Yeah. Well, you know, people are people. You know, we're not all necessarily wired exactly the same, which means on the sharing end, I mean, Becky talks about kind of being an open book. You know, that's her way in the world, and that's what feels comfortable. And certainly, I mean, listen, when you're dealing with something really hard in your life, you want to do what has previously worked. I mean, you want to come up with the tools that you know you can count on. And so for you, Becky, wearing your heart on your sleeve, making sure that people know that's your way of walking through life. And whether, you know, through the best of times and worst of times, that's your kind of way of approaching it. If somebody doesn't feel similarly inclined. I mean, people feel this to varying degrees, and not all, and may feel differently with respect to, you know, different players in their life. So, you know, what you tell your mom may be different than what you tell to, you know, to your friends versus what you tell to the person who's in the checkout counter at, you know, at Loblaws. I mean, so we approach each different person differently, and I think we also need to kind of recognize that, you know, we are the owners of our own story. I mean, so to give ourselves permission to say, you know, I mean, I will let different people in at a rate and pace that I feel comfortable with. Certainly, if your comfort level is driven by the need to completely be silent because you absolutely don't want to say it out loud and you don't want to burden anyone, well, Eric has told us about, you know, I mean, what happens. So, but somewhere in between, you need to find a place. I guess, you know, getting on point to your question, what can you expect from people? Well, you can expect that not everybody has the same emotional bandwidth, you know, and people come at this with a different lived experience. So some people are able to listen and really listen well, and listening is probably more important than what they say. You know, if somebody can listen to you with kind of an open mind and heart and empathically, that's usually extraordinarily helpful. When people start to feel that they need to say something, that's where you really see the variability of emotional bandwidth. I mean, some people will want to say something to make themselves feel better and hoping it might make you feel better. You're going to be okay. You know, I know you're a strong person. You're going to get through this. You know, that's not necessarily helpful. It's almost a way of saying, I really wish I hadn't heard what you said, but now that I've heard it, I guess I need to say something that sort of sounds helpful. So again, I think that's what you can expect everything across the waterfront. People who they don't have to say anything. You can just be in their presence and you feel comforted because you know they get it. And others who say a little bit and it still works, and others who say far too much and it's not necessarily helpful. Most people have good intentions. So maybe just to remind yourself that even the person who seems to be really not wired to deal with this in a helpful way, most people are motivated by, wishing they could say the right thing, wishing that they could somehow wave a wand and you would be better. But in the absence of having a wand, sometimes they open up their mouth and, chances are something that isn't particularly helpful may come out. Occasionally something helpful does come out, but you can expect that kind of variety.
Thank you very much. I'm going to touch on one last thing in this area, and then we're going to bridge to a conversation generally, and let me call it mental wellness. But there's in oftentimes an intimate partner, a spouse, when you're diagnosed, they're diagnosed. They're kind of, I use the terminology equal partners. The diagnosis impacts that intimate partner, that spouse, more than anyone potentially. In both of your cases, Eric and Becky, you've indicated that you've had really supportive spouses. And so Dr. Chechena, my question really is focused on, how do we help spouses or partners of people who've just been diagnosed in these circumstances, because they're in the thick of it almost equally to that of their partner.
I'm wondering, Anne, if we might defer to either Eric and or Becky to say, so what do you think was helpful to them, or how do you understand how they've kind of, navigated this whole journey?
Perfect.
Yeah, I can touch base on that. For me, it was my husband is a very positive person. He's a silver lining, happy-go-lucky person. So he initially he was like, "Well, get through this. Let's do this," But it is really hard because the thoughts that go through their mind is she gonna die? What am I gonna do without her? how am I going to be a single dad of 3 kids? I have a baby here. I work full time. I own a business. How am I going to do this? She's my everything. I know that those thoughts went through his mind, and that is hard and that is real. And I think for us, we talked about it a lot. We talked a lot about more on the positive side, but how we were going to get through this. What supports did we need? If something did go wrong, that it didn't go well. What supports did we need during surgery? Him just doing it all wasn't realistic. So we really had to sit down and kind of make a list of, okay, do we need help with meals on these days? Do we need my mom to come and stay with us? What friends can help us take these kids here and there, and really putting together a plate of data that helped us get through that hard time, because that's the real stuff that you have to get through. And if you don't have a plan, you kind of just, your brain is all over the place. So I think that was something that was really helpful. And of course, my husband, he talked to friends, or he would, have some alone time when he could, and to try and process it. But you're absolutely right. It happens to both of us. And it is really, really hard, especially when you really like your husband like I do. And I know he still really likes me, and so, I mean, not especially, because it's hard no matter what. But it's something really hard to navigate for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Those are amazing strategies. Eric, your situation, how did you and your partner manage?
Well, there's no playbook for it, because Becky touched on some of the elements of sort of being in this early midlife stage and having children who still need significant care, having careers and other responsibilities even outside that, and all of a sudden you have this cancer thing where somebody is going to be debilitated for at least for a while by surgery and maybe other treatments. And I think what was helpful for my care partner, Jasmine, is just having family members and family friends who would just step in and do something. When I had a surgery in February, we had family friends who took our kids in the morning and then took them to school, picked them up from school, kept them until the evening, until somebody could come and get them, and that happened to be my mother. So you just try to stitch together sort of some semblance of normalcy for your family, taking whatever help you can get from friends or family. And it does have an impact on the care partner. I think care partners are underappreciated because the focus is on the patient, which is probably the way it should be, but the care partner is going through it too. And they have, next to the patient, they have the most to lose if things don't go well. And they're thinking about that, but they also have to manage the children and the household and their own emotions going through this. So it's helpful when people actually step in and help instead of talking about it.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to just give the final comment to you, Dr. Chechenov. Is there strategies that you might give to people who are watching and listening in terms of helping the partner, the key caregiver, to cope and thrive?
I guess I'd say if somebody is listening to this, that they take particular note of what Becky and Eric are saying, because they've walked through this. I mean, they bring this kind of deep wisdom that comes from lived experience. I'm also thinking about something that Eric said earlier about, do we talk about it if we can't even fix it? So why bother? I think what both Becky and Eric though are saying to us, that even if you can't fix something, I mean, it's important to talk about. And not only is it important, it's helpful. People talk about, this kind of, the prison of positive thinking or a conspiracy of silence, that, if there's something that either we just have to stay positive and anything else is not allowed, and really are kind of held prisoner by that we can't speak about it because otherwise it leads us to talking about things that we can't fix. And I think the wisdom that you both bring to the table is, you know what, even if we can't fix it, Becky, you talk about, this terror that, what if I don't get better? What if I die? What if my husband is, you know what, those are really awful and difficult things to have to contemplate, but way better to at least be able to talk about them and share them with each other rather than pretend that neither of us are thinking about it, that it kind of rattles around in our brains. So I think you've both shared with us that talking about things, irrespective of where your mind takes you to, if you are fortunate to have somebody that you can share those things with, it's going to help each of you walk through this in a way in which you're going to feel less isolated and more supported.
Right. We only have a couple of moments left, and I really want to ask Becky and Eric to briefly comment on the one or two key things that for yourselves kept you resilient, mentally well, how you invested in yourself to really help you both go through a very difficult experience. So, just for our audience who would like to, or probably admiring your stories, Eric, what's the one or two things that you did to keep yourself mentally in a good place, insofar as you could?
Well, there's a lot about cancer that you can't control. So it's important to find something that you can control. And for me, that was diet and exercise. There's a lot of evidence that having the proper diet and regular exercise actually can improve patient outcomes. So that's something you can cling to. And other than that, I think having support, both people within the cancer community and just some of your friends who don't have cancer, just being surrounded by people, and not necessarily to talk about cancer, but because who wants to talk about cancer all day? Just having the company of friends, even if they can't say anything or do anything to help your situation, just being with people is therapeutic.
Well said. Thank you. Becky, can I give you the final word on this one?
Sure, absolutely. Just to add on to that, Eric, that's a really good point. I found that after I was diagnosed, that's all I thought about. Cancer, cancer, cancer. And so what I had to do was kind of just find some things that I knew brought me true joy and happiness. And being with friends was one of them. And doing things that would take your mind off having cancer and put you into the moment of whatever it is you do. So I would suggest just find something you love. If you love golfing, go golfing. If you meditate, do that. Play a sport, do something that really brings you joy to your soul and your heart so that you can kind of just be in the moment of living and not think so much about the diagnosis that you have just been given.
Right. Perfect. And on that note, we'll have to end it. And I know that all three of you have offered to stay and to answer questions from our audience. And I know we're going to have lots of them. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much to Eric, to Becky, and you, Dr. Chachinov. Thank you, Becky, Eric, and Dr. Chachinov for joining us for the next few moments for a really wonderful Q&A session. We've got a number of questions that are coming through, and I'm going to actually begin the session with you, Dr. Chachinov. And the question that we have is that how do you reconcile feelings of loss of control around a diagnosis that you've just received with the need to take control or take charge of your care? Let me rephrase that again. Feelings of loss of control around your diagnosis with the need to take control or take charge of your care.
A wonderful question. And of course, I mean, the emotional challenges are complex, but to be brief, the fact is that there's the task really is about how can you differentiate between the things that you can control versus the things that you can't. And I think that, there are things that are happening that you really don't have a handle on, that you're having to yield to others to direct you in terms of treatment and remedies and a therapeutic pathway to follow. But what you can do is to look at the things that are within your control. And even if those things are seemingly minor, being able to take charge of those things, to know what things you can direct in your life, is going to put you on a path of feeling healthier, like you are not just a passive bystander, but that you're an active participant.
Mhm. Thank you. That's actually really rather simplistic advice. I want to move to the subject of caregiving because we have a number of questions in this area. And Becky, Eric, it would be interesting to hear from your perspective the idea that how do you balance out the responsibilities of being a caregiver with other responsibilities like work or caring for other family members. Certainly both of you likely had to navigate through the subject of caregiving in both of your own personal experiences. Becky, maybe we'll go to you first.
Sure, that's a great question. I would say it's really important to lean on your support group. If you're not used to asking for help, now's the time. If you don't know how to verbalize help, send a text. Ask your neighbors to bring a meal over. Lean on some resource groups that might be in your community. There's lots of cancer support groups that can provide help. I think it's really important that you let go of the fact that you were the mom or you were the dad full time and just focus on yourself and ask for help from your support group. That's a really important piece.
Thank you. Eric, did you want to comment on that?
I don't think I have anything to add. I would just say, like Becky said, ask for help. Don't be shy. This is your chance to get help.
Yeah. Thank you for reinforcing that. Dr. Chechenov, I'm going to throw it back to you here is, based on your experience, is there research that supports or states that people who have access to psychosocial services earlier in their diagnosis have better cancer outcomes? Is there any literature, research in this space?
I think it really depends on what you mean by cancer outcomes. I mean, if people can access the resources that they need and the supports they need, there's certainly evidence to suggest that that is going to help them achieve, a better quality of life. That they're going to cope better, they're going to function better, they're going to feel better inside of their own skin. But in terms of cancer outcomes, in terms of, the course of illness, I mean, the literature on that is very messy and certainly not at all conclusive. So the idea of get what you need because it will help you feel better. And if you feel better, of course, you're going to be able to participate more actively in your cancer care and going to be able to participate more actively in your day-to-day life because cancer is not the entirety of who you are or what your life is about, in spite of how overwhelming it can feel.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions that are interrelated, and I'm going to bring both Becky and Eric into this conversation, and even Dr. Chechenov, you may want to comment on it, but it's around this idea that, how do we reply to people who say, well, gee, you really don't look like you're sick, or you seem to be okay, but you look okay. Like, how many times did you experience that? I mean, how did you react to it? How did you respond to it? And maybe we'll start, Becky, again with you, and then bring Eric and Dr. Chechenov into the conversation.
Sure, that is a good question. And I think that sometimes comes from internal worries or insecurities as well, because I think there's a common misconception around cancer that if you have cancer, you must have no hair and you have big bags under your eyes and you're throwing up all the time. And that really just isn't the case for many types of cancer. And the only thing I can say is refer to Dr. Seuss and say those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind.
I love it. Yes, yeah, wonderful. Eric, your response?
Well, this is just how I am, but I would assume that person has good intentions, and what they're really trying to say is, you look great, and I want the best for you. So I would just assume that they're trying to say something nice and supportive.
Yeah. And there has to be, Dr. Chechenov, not about the person that is they're speaking to, but about them. If you could bring that back into and comment on the question, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, people sometimes feel compelled to say something. They feel that, if they can just find the right words or the right phrase, if they can just deliver that, that bit of comfort, that's going to, make a positive difference for that individual. And so they say something, as many times as not, it probably doesn't hit the mark because, as Becky said, it has to do with their own discomfort. So hopefully, as the person who's the recipient to what they're saying, there's that level of kind of understanding and forgiveness. Okay, I get it. You want me to look okay because you care about me, and you're saying these things because it comes from a place where you'd like to think that I am okay. From the person who is saying these things, the message is, you're probably better off listening and listening carefully, because what you say is less helpful than the fact that you're listening, that you're engaged, and that conveys a message, even without a single word.
Thank you. There's some questions here related to strategies for managing the variety of emotions that come up once you're newly diagnosed. Certainly Becky and Eric, you can comment on that. And what can parents with children do to help manage some of the emotions that children will experience when a parent is going through what they're going through? So Eric, let's start with you.
Well, that's a big question, and in a sense, we spent this whole session trying to answer that question. But I think managing the emotions is something that just takes time, and you just have to be patient with yourself and patient with your loved ones, and share as honestly and openly as you can in an appropriate way, but in an optimistic way that isn't totally delusional or misleading. So I guess you have to just appreciate the fact that it's going to be a process dealing with the whirlwind of emotions for yourself and your loved ones.
Becky?
Yeah, that's exactly true. Be patient with yourself. Remind yourself that you're doing a good job. Remind yourself that you're doing the best you can, and reach out for support. There's counseling through Colon Cancer Canada. There's lots of different resources that you can access to, even if you're not sure what to say to your children, talk to a counselor about how to word that so that you're saying the right thing. You're not saying too many things, but you're being clear. Again, I would just say, look for support.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Chechenov, you may want to comment on that dialogue a parent might have with the child and some of the best approaches for that.
I think that it's likely already been said. This idea of permission giving, letting children know that you are there and available to talk about things when the child is ready. So it really is, it's almost like this very gentle, loving invitation. The door is open. I'm not pushing you through it. I'm not telling you when we need to march you through it. But the message is that the door is open and I'm here on the other side, ready to receive whatever it is you might be feeling. And the other thing I think to think about is that, listen, we're dealing with hard stuff. People are going to feel sadness. They're going to feel frightened, and to model that that's okay. I mean, the goal is not, how can we all feel happy all of the time? The fact is that when we're going through difficult things, there's no way of going around it. We need to go through it. So even though it's painful and it's tough, we're going to be here, and we're going to be here to try and do this together.
Mm. Maybe I can build on that based on the another question that has come through, which is the changing family roles after a cancer diagnosis, especially if somebody who is a key breadwinner in the family or plays a particular role in the family, and that role starts to change and the family dynamics need to change. What kind of conversation needs to happen in relationship to those changing dynamics? If I could get your input on that, Dr. Chechenov, that would be terrific.
Oh, sure. It is one of the tougher questions, and I think one of the tougher challenges, because when a cancer experience starts to kind of impinge, starts to assault things that you identify so closely as being who you are, then what you're left with is, well, am I still me? And how do I be this person who now maybe can't do all the things that I used to do? So besides the dialogue that you need to have, with the betwixt and between family members, the person going through this experience, has to spend some time kind of thinking about that and deliberating that, and really trying to, what are things that this cancer experience can't touch? What are, who is fundamentally me, and the things that cancer just doesn't have access to? Because if you can hang on to that, then even though you may not be able to carry out all the roles that you once did, you can still maintain a sense of personhood, and that, of course, emotionally and spiritually, psychologically, is critical.
Thank you. And I'm afraid that we're going to have to end the Q&A session there. I want to reinforce for our audience that for those questions that didn't get answered, our friends at Colorectal Cancer Canada are very committed to ensuring that they be in touch with you. Or if you do have separate questions that you would like to discuss with somebody, please reach out to Colorectal Cancer. Thank you again to Dr. Chechenov, to Becky, to Eric for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.